Imagine this, like, Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. The word coffee itself comes from a village or a region in Ethiopia called Kaffa.
Oh, wow.
And that's where Arabica coffee all started from.
Okay.
And so for roughly 800 to 1,000 years, coffee has been consumed in Ethiopia.
Welcome to Dishin Diaspora, where we'll explore the journeys of people shaping the food world. Through their stories, we'll uncover how food connects us to culture, history, and each other. I'm your host, Chef Emmy. I am so honored to introduce a guest who has blended two cultures into a thriving business and community hub, Efrem Fesaha. The founder and CEO of Boon Boona Coffee, he has brought the rich coffee traditions of East Africa to Seattle while fostering community connections that go far beyond the coffee cup. Efrem's journey began in 2011 when a trip to Eritrea deepened his connection to his roots and to the vibrant culture of his heritage. Inspired by Eritrea's traditional coffee ceremony, the sense of community they create, Efrem returned home to Seattle with a mission to honor and share his experience. In 2012, he started Boon Boona Coffee by supplying green coffee beans to Seattle's East African community. 7 years later, his vision expanded to the opening of Boon Boona's first cafe and roastery in Renton. And since then, it's grown into 4 thriving cafes. Today, Boon Boona is known for sourcing exceptional coffee beans exclusively from African farmers in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, and other African nations, with a focus on empowering women-led smallholder producers. Efrem's leadership and vision have earned him well-deserved recognition, including being named Washington State's Small Business Person of the Year in 2022. Beyond coffee, he's a mentor and advocate for emerging entrepreneurs, particularly within the BIPOC community, showing others how to turn their passions into impactful businesses. Please join me in welcoming the visionary and coffee innovator, Efrem Fesaha. Welcome.
Chef Emmy, I so appreciate it. That's very generous of you. I'm so grateful.
It's all facts though, right?
You had it exactly.
Good. I hope it's all
yeah, it is. You did right by it. Yeah.
Nice.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we dive into your story though, I'm going to kick off with a fun little game to kind of break the ice.
Let's go.
It's called Quick Dish. And I'm going to be dishing out 2 things and you just pick whatever one speaks to you the most. Okay? All right. Home cooked meals or takeout?
Oh, God. No, that's hard. Home cooked meals feel better.
Yes.
They feel better inside.
I like that answer.
It's just warm.
It's like the soul.
Soul, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that answer.
Yeah,
that was great.
Yeah.
Berbere or curry powder?
Berbere.
Did I say that right? Berbere?
Yeah, berbere. You got it. Yeah, nailed it. Oh, yeah.
Spicy or mild?
Spicy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Street food or fine dining?
Ooh. All right. Jeez. I'm fine dining.
Okay.
I'm fine dining.
Okay.
Yeah,
No problem with that.
Oh,
Coffee or chai?
Coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, right? Sweet or savory breakfast?
Sweet.
Nice.
Yeah, sweet.
Okay. Popcorn or dabo with your coffee?
Double.
And I said it right. Okay,
and you
good.
said it right. Yeah, double.
Okay.
Double.
And then rice or injera?
Injera.
I feel like I knew, of course, some of these answers.
Yep, those are great.
Awesome. Okay, I do want to dive deep into your story because the way that you've blended cultures with your business so seamlessly is really like fascinating to me. So let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and really we were refugees. We were at the time, Eritrea and Ethiopia were at war, and so we had to get out. And so this is probably like 1975. I wasn't born then at the time. And then we went across the water we went to Sudan, then into Saudi Arabia, which is right across the water in the Red Sea. And my dad was able to find a job with Saudi Airlines as a mechanic, which then landed an opportunity with Boeing. Oh, okay. And so that's kind of how we got to Seattle. But so I was born in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Okay. But from the age of 5, I grew up here in Seattle. So,
wow. Yeah. Okay. I'm wondering, because I immigrated to Seattle when I was 6 years old from Brazil, and I feel like I did struggle a bit. And I look back at my like the whole moving process here and kind of growing up here, and now I'm seeing, you know, just the huge impact that it had in my life and kind of like trauma, if you will, as well. I wonder with you, I know Seattle has a really large East African community, Eritrean and Ethiopian. Because of that, did you ever like struggle with, you know, did you feel like you belonged in that community? Did you ever struggle feeling you weren't Eritrean enough or American enough? How was that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I struggled with that for a long time.
Yeah.
Because when, more when I was younger, it was kind of like, you're from where? You know, what
That
is that?
question.
You eat what? What do you eat? What's this?
The
What?
from where?
Yeah. You smell like onions. Like, what's going on? You're like,
Yeah.
there was always something there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if traveled, to Eritrea, like, they'd be like, oh yeah, like,
You little
you're
American.
you're not from here. Like, what are you doing?
Is there a word like, in Latin cultures, Brazil, we say gringo?
Yeah.
Is there like a word?
For us, we're called bellas.
Bella.
And that's kind of actually slang. So bellas
It's a slang,
it's a cactus fruit.
Oh.
And so which only comes during the summertime, which is when the Americans, or like when folks from the diaspora come back. And so so they would call you bellas.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's like cactus fruit.
Yeah. So you kind of just were like, also like me, living into this like third culture space where you kind of were unique.
Yeah.
One thing about the community, the Eritrean and Ethiopian community here, I grew up with a lot of friends of that background. So, I've gone to the big traditional weddings, like baptism, and even, reading your story about the coffee ceremony, I go back and I remember times when I would visit my friends and I would like, running past the living room, would see what I now know is like that coffee ceremony being prepared. At the time, my friends would be like, oh, they're making coffee. And to me, like, I was like, okay, like, it wasn't weird because I think I always just knew it was like, oh, it's like this performance is involved or this like community thing is involved. It wasn't weird for me, but looking back, I really think that the community here in Seattle does a really incredible job of like holding its traditions and culture in place. In your opinion, what do you think makes that possible for this community to stay so connected to these traditions, even so far away from home?
That's a great question. I mean, just kind of thinking back at it, that time, especially the early 80s, 90s, as Eritreans, Ethiopians were making their way here, similar to journey as mine, where they're escaping kind of the circumstances there, and making their way here. What would happen is typically you're going to gather wherever folks at. So, Chef Emmy's in Seattle.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you know what? Let me call her up. Maybe she could find me a job too when I'm there. And so I got this opportunity to come to America, and here I go. And you know what? I'm gonna pick Seattle because Chef Emmy's there.
Right.
And so then you kind of create this community there, where it's a support system as you're kind of just getting going. And so that was happening then, and I think that it was basically a way of keeping those traditions, keeping a sense of warmth and community, but recognizing also, you're in this, new place and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's where at least that's where I saw it as well, like at that time. And it's for it to continue on, it's been more of, I think that there are some things that is like, oh, we actually do enjoy that and want to continue seeing those things.
Yeah.
And the coffee ceremony is one of those things, which is, still a big part of, even now, my wife, myself, like, we're doing it on a weekend. Maybe not like as frequently as like my mom would have done it,
Right.
but it's like, okay, on a Sunday we're relaxing, we're gonna pull it out and we're gonna drink some coffee and do it the traditional way. So I think that it's a form of. It started off as just like, this is a way of kind of continuing on community, and honestly a great way to socialize, hear about what's going on and everything too. So
Nice. Okay, the coffee ceremony, can you explain it to us, like from beginning to end, and like what is like the significance of it?
I'll probably start with the significance of it. I mean, I think that traditionally we would really congregate around the coffee ceremony, and so that is when we gossip, but it's also when so we're sharing everybody's information, but at the same time it's also where we would talk about anyone that passed away. We would mourn, we would celebrate around the coffee ceremony, and so it's kind of like that centerpiece, and it becomes kind of like, almost a drumbeat to how you would navigate through different situations. So
Yeah.
when a guest is arriving, you know, it's like a celebration. You're receiving that guest. In a time of mourning, you know, it's a way of like, in the period of like when you're crying, it's like okay, hey, we're gonna take a break and just breathe for a second. Let's talk about it as well. And so once that coffee ceremony starts, then that becomes an opportunity for it as well too. And so you see it as like truly, yeah, like it controls the tempo of certain things, whether it's a celebration of things coming in, or even in a time of like, all right, we need to have a conversation. So it plays that. So it's a very critical piece. And so there's that component. And then how the process is like really, you know, imagine this, like, you know, Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. The word coffee itself, it comes from a village or a region in Ethiopia called Kaffa.
Oh, wow.
And that's where Arabica coffee all started from.
Okay.
And so for roughly 800 to 1,000 years, coffee has been consumed in Ethiopia, and then is spread out throughout the diaspora, and Eritrea being right there, and then even into parts of Sudan and such like that. And so imagine this is like, you've got these coffee trees growing. You pull off one of these little cherries, you peel it open, and you start to cook it. And you cook it on just like basically a pan.
Yeah.
And so you're pan roasting coffee. You take that roasted coffee, you grind it in an old school mortar pestle, basically. And then now you've got ground coffee.
Wow.
And the most basic, you know, way of boiling or brewing stuff was clay pottery and such. And so we have what is called a jemina, which is a clay pot that we put those coffee grounds in, add water, and then the magic starts. Now that's the basics of at least just the coffee process. What happens around it is a full ceremony. And even though we just call it just having bunna or boon, you know, which is let's just have coffee. There are, especially when it comes to different cultures in the region, have different practices, different approaches to it. But you know, you'll lay out grass. You know, you'll have popcorn. You'll have double. You'll have you know, some candy maybe. You'll have all these like appetizers that go with the coffee. You'll burn incense as well as a way of welcoming kind of the guests in, and obviously to enhance the smell and kind of like that sensory experience as well. Because then where maybe it kind of gets a little bit more into the spiritual or kind of like maybe more moving kind of ways where, yeah, you're coming into this room and there is like a sensory takeover where it's like coffee being roasted, incense being burned at the same time, and you know, you're about to start consuming this delicious beverage. And so in that, you know, there are components to it that are somewhat spiritual, maybe superstitious as well, but it gets pretty deep, and it's a lot of fun. But in its simplest form, it's just how we socialize too.
I love it. I do remember, if I go back in my childhood and my teen years visiting my friends' houses, I do remember that like smell of that incense burning as well. Wow. And so usually I would always see like the moms or the aunties preparing it. Is it separate? Like, do men and women kind of gather together?
That might be more if there's depending on religious kind of components, but for the most part, everybody kind of gathers together for it. It is typically women that lead the coffee ceremony, the process. It is changing a little bit, so men are kind of doing it a little bit more often. Like, especially if I do it in the cafe, you know, aunties may come in, they'll be like, "Oh, that's cute," you know,
that's cute.
Go ahead and try.
I love it.
But then when they try it, they're like, "Oh, it's actually good."
Okay.
It can be where it's just like the men in one space, and then you know, or just the women. But then, depending on kind of cultural and religious factors, most of the time though, it's everybody together.
Nice. And so, like after college, and then you went to work in corporate America, it sounds like. But then you decided to reconnect back with your roots and took a 3-month trip to Eritrea. So what do you think sparked that calling back home?
You know, for me, I was really burnt out, and I was wanting, you know, I was in finance. That was kind of my, you know, my career was in finance, and you know, 2008, 2010 was financial crisis, and you know, it was a tough time, and a lot of people were getting laid off, and I was fortunate to not get laid off, but I was doing a lot of work, and the burnout happened much more rapidly. And also too, I was wanting to figure out kind of what the next phase of things would be, and a sense of kind of getting back, one, spiritually, but also kind of just learning more about my culture, kind of dreaming about what life would have been like if I had been there, and and so kind of eat, pray, love, but then also just a backpacker's journey. And so it was more of that. And then when I got there, not that I had the thought of really like, oh, I'm gonna get into coffee, it just kind of came to be, and there's reasons for that, but it was all selfishly motivated by like just enriching myself more in my culture and spirituality more.
Was that the first time that you had gone back, or
no? This was my second time. I had gone back my senior year of high school.
Okay.
And then that was only for a month. And then this time, though, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to backpack this thing and just go hang out. And spent a lot of time in the village.
Did you have a lot of family there still?
Not a lot of family.
Okay.
Kind of like second, third cousins and such. But, in the village where, the majority of my family is from is called Gurat. And so you walk out the door and you're running into a cousin, or you're into the middle, like the town square kind of area. And then they're like, oh, come over for food, or come have coffee with me. And so that's kind of the beauty of, the village life.
Amazing. So it's fair to say that the idea for Boon Boona sparked after this trip or during the trip?
I think it was pretty much during the trip, because Eritrea was there was the rich history of just the traditional coffee experience, but Eritrea was colonized by Italy too. And so for that 50-year period, they built a lot of infrastructure, but then also put a lot of cafes there too. And so you would see this the traditional side, but then also kind of contemporary, like espresso bars and such. And so there was one in particular called Tres Stelle in the capital city of Asmara, and there they would roast their coffee there, but it was the first time I really enjoyed a cappuccino and a macchiato, a traditional macchiato. And I was like, which is basically 2 ounces of espresso and like an ounce and a half, 2 ounces of milk, and so it's just a little bit smaller, which kind of some of the big dogs, I won't say who, start adding like caramel and vanilla and
stuff,
but a traditional macchiato is just really small. It's just espresso and then just a little bit of milk to it. But that kind of like is what got me excited about it, and came back and I was like, let me figure this out.
Nice. And so you came back and you opened Boon Boona. You first started by selling green coffee beans. And green coffee beans, when you talked about like the cherries, is that what green coffee bean is?
For the most part. So it's what's inside of it. So the cherry is a red cherry, but then you peel it open and you've got these 2 seeds inside of there. Beans, and then you'll take those and it's green in its color. And for those who roast their own coffee, even if it's for a home roaster who is just a hobbyist, or I mean, any roaster, will want their coffee green and roast it themselves. But then for this niche, for a community as like the Ethiopian Eritrean community who roasts at home, they typically will buy only smaller quantities, or maybe 1 burlap bag at a time. And so it's not something that's easily accessible at most grocery stores. And so they're having to buy it off of importers and things like that. And so as a result, a lot of the mom and pop stores that sell berbere and all the other spices for traditional kind of like Ethiopian, East African food, they would sell green coffee. And so that's where we would go buy it. And usually quality isn't always there. And so I kind of said, okay, I can't afford to open up a roastery and cafe, so maybe I just get into the green coffee space. And that's kind of how it all came to be. But that's green coffee. It's just the stage before you roast it.
Roast it. Okay, nice. So with Boon Boona, I feel like, again, you have done a really good job with like merging the 2 culture, because Seattle's really big on coffee culture as well. And I would always drive past certain cafes, shall be nameless, and I would always see like the uncles or dad grandpas like gathering together, and it was really smart to like, why don't we own one of our own and like have that place be for everyone to gather. So you were able to do that from going from being kind of like a wholesaler of green coffee beans to getting that space. What did that feel like when you opened the doors to the first cafe?
Oh, I mean, I was grateful.
Yeah.
I definitely felt a sense of joy just for having taken such, taken that journey as long as it was, which was 7 years really. I wanted to do it 7 years ago prior to that, and it took that long. So there was that joy of just, I was grateful to have reached that point. And there was a little bit of me where it was like, you know what, honestly, if I fail at this right now, I'm glad that I attempted it even. Because even opening the doors was like such a challenge because, you're building out and it takes longer and all this stuff. So there was a lot of kind of emotions, a lot of feelings around it. But I was grateful to open it up. And fortunately, the community in Renton where I got started came out and supported. And then having grown up here as well, the community at large kind of came out and supported. And it took a little while, but it started to pick up. And so there was just it was a lot of joy, a lot of relief and stress, and still it was everything. It was everything at once, but I was definitely very grateful. It was definitely a challenging period of time as I was kind of both working my full-time job as well and started and opened up the space, and I was very nervous about kind of my lack of experience as an entrepreneur or as a CEO. And so I was like, I should probably sit in some classrooms. And so I was taking classes at both UW and Seattle U.
And working the full-time job and getting ready to open this. Wow.
So all of it was kind of, it was, I kind of looked at it as like, I was grateful to get to that point, but I don't have the luxury necessarily of failing. Falling. So I really need to I was like, I need to figure this out. And so, kind of,
Would you say now you have 4 cafes, which is amazing. Would you say, so my family opened up the first Brazilian restaurant in Seattle in 98. It's no longer here, but I always get a question of like, so there are a lot of Brazilians or Americans that were your clients? And for us in the beginning, it was like a lot of Americans actually. How about you? Like, what do you see in the
It was a diverse bag. It was everybody. Because I think it was both those factors, because one, it was definitely the community in Renton that came out and supported. So it was everybody there. And what I was doing prior to opening up the space was like, I was at their at the farmers market, which is about fortunately like a block and a half from the cafe. So I was like, hey, we're opening up. And so there was that side of it. And I would, when I had the time, I would just open the doors and just give out free coffee as well. And so there was kind of a build-up, at least, of like, oh, there's this spot opening up, and then the community came out and support. So it was that. So it was very diverse. And Renton is actually one of the most diverse communities in the nation. It's about 110,000 population, but very diverse in its representation, especially as folks, moved south and from just kind of the changes. I'm spacing out on the word.
Like gentrification
of from the CD down south, so it was to Renton, Kent, and Federal Way and such. And so, I knew that I wanted to be in a diverse community, and fortunately, Renton was a great home. And then obviously the East African community was there too for me. They knew me through the green coffee, and then my family and everybody, friends. I grew up here, so it was a lot of that. It was everybody. Awesome. It was everybody.
Nice. Getting back to like the coffee and the coffee growers, how do African coffee growers fit into like the global coffee industry, and like what sets them apart?
Yeah, I mean, it's really unique, and each country is pretty unique in its own way because they all have their own governing approaches to it. But Ethiopia, just starting off with Ethiopia being the birthplace of it, it's actually number 4 when it comes to exporting of coffee. So Brazil and Vietnam are ahead of Ethiopia. But Ethiopia is number 1 when it comes to consuming its own coffee as well, too. So they export out, but they also consume the most because there's such a long and rich history with the traditional coffee ceremony that happens there. So that's one aspect for them. But then another side of it is also, too, a lot of it is, it's co-op based, and so you go out and you pick your cherries and you bring it back to a central location where you're gonna then go through the process of whether it's going to be a natural process or a wash process for the coffee. All those things are done in one centralized location for the most part. And so you don't really have this history of like, one, wealthy person kind of owning a large mass of land and cultivating their own coffee. It's really more communal.
Okay.
And that's a lot of Africa too. And so there isn't that kind of, one wealthy like baron basically like, of all coffee.
Yeah.
That is pretty common across the board there. Another factor is that, in places like Kenya, places like Rwanda and Burundi, really unique as well in their own right. For them, a lot of the coffee cultivation kind of happened when USAID had come in and helped kind of introduce, that as an opportunity for production. And so a lot of coffee production started around then, so around the 90s pretty much. And so it's unique in each place, and all have kind of this story. Even in like places like DRC, where it's believed that Robusta coffee started from, so another species of coffee. More up and coming as well. But now you're getting into places like Cameroon, where coffee is now being cultivated as well. Arabica coffee plus the Robusta coffee. So these higher grade coffees are being found there. And then you even go south. Where is it? Down in, not Namibia, but they had stopped coffee production for some period of time and are just getting back into it now. Wow. And that's actually through kind of support from Brazil as well.
Okay.
So each, it's there's usually one common area, part of the world. It's kind of like where coffee really grows at more abundantly than other parts. But we're seeing coffee kind of outside of like far north in the Sahara or far south where it's extra sunny as well, in this perfect middle spot where coffee is being grown by a lot more producers. And we try keeping our ears open to what's going on, and staying active in that way. But some of them are up and coming. Some have had a long history in it. Some have changed their models as well. In Ethiopia, there's more transparency as to who the coffee producers are. It used to come to a centralized place on a coffee exchange, and then people would buy it there. So each one has their own unique space, but it's changing. It's the one where there's probably, I'd say, the most opportunity, which is why I kind of wanted to dive into Africa as my place for sourcing. Of course, I'm of African descent, but also where the opportunity exists, because it is still up and coming. It's still trying to establish itself. And so any opportunity to highlight the producers or the stories and the unique situations in each place is an opportunity that, maybe helps it further along. Obviously we're a small producer, a small player in coffee, but we hope that we can have at least some, opportunity to help put some spotlight on the producers there. So
for sure. We talked about the role that women take in the ceremony, and your focus on women-led farmers. Is it kind of as a woman's job as well, mostly the farming, or not really?
No, it's everybody. Everybody kind of gets their hands in there. It's just that there's more intentionality. And so that was primarily in Rwanda and Burundi that we saw that. And so really champions like Janine, who is the owner of J&P Coffee, she is a descendant of coffee growers, and she lived in Burundi, grew up in Burundi, but she's also resides in Baltimore. And so she saw this opportunity to help kind of establish farms and establish more production out of Burundi, and has helped through an organization called Women's Coffee Association to help establish a lot of producing women-owned and led production spaces, farms. And so it's more individuals like herself
Mm-hmm.
that have helped in doing that and being
Okay.
more intentional about it. And there's also something to be said about kind of how funds are used as well in a
Mm-hmm.
community. Um, the women will typically be like, "Yo,
Yeah.
take care of
Yeah.
their kids and family and everything."
Definitely.
And so there's more emphasis there, and so the impact is great.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's more your champions like Janine that are doing that. And then similarly in Rwanda, there are other leaders as well who are helping in educating, providing classroom spaces basically to help with the yield, but then also being able to distinguish qualities and such within coffee space, focused on women as well. And so it's led by the
Gotcha.
women there, and
Okay.
we were just fortunate to
Nice.
hear about them and say, "Yeah, let's
Yeah.
work with them." So yeah.
Okay. Do you go back often as part of your work with Boon Boona?
I wish I could say I do. It's more our coffee director now.
Okay.
So
Nice.
Ali is the one that's more
Okay.
foot on the ground,
Okay.
and so he's been going back to Rwanda more often,
Nice.
as there's been some great programs there.
Okay.
And so yeah, myself in the last 6 years, I'd probably say with just kind of the running around with the business itself and trying to keep it going, it's
Yeah.
kind of demanded my attention here, but you know. Ali knows what the goal
Mm-hmm.
is and what we're trying to do, and is helping execute it all the
Nice.
time, and does a phenomenal job within the space, not only in selection of coffee, but also in the types of relationships we want, and even what it is that we aspire to get to as well. So yeah,
Gotcha.
capable
Nice.
hands. Yeah.
What did your family say when you were like, guess what? I'm opening a cafe. I'm wondering what they thought.
I would say that, I'm very fortunate to have a very supportive family. And so my mom was, very supportive.
Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely like, okay, like, you got this, like,
Yeah.
but, she would always, I don't think there's really a time where she's ever been like, no, don't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe once, but outside of that, like she's always like, go get it,
Nice.
and, go do it. And, she's been there to support,
Yeah.
and, whenever I need, do the coffee ceremony, or sometimes when it was roasting,
Yeah.
she would always, and, the best person to market my product
Right.
was my mom,
Yeah, right.
because she's doing the coffee ceremony with her sisters, with her friends, with the
Yeah.
community. And, she's telling folks, yeah, this is Efrem's,
Nice. Oh.
and so she was the plug.
Awesome.
She was the
Yeah,
one that would help,
nice.
and so
Okay. She
mom
made it
was very
legit.
supportive. She made it legit. She made it legit. And honestly, I've been fortunate to work with my sister,
Nice.
Faven, who is in charge of our wholesale side. But, back
Yeah.
in 2016, I remember, just going to Atlanta, and we were there for, we had a tent in the blistering sun, like
gosh.
trying to sell coffee.
Yeah.
And, it was with her. She was there to support me. And she's still here supporting me.
Yeah.
And, we're fortunate enough to be on this journey together as well. And so, yeah, very fortunate. And then my wife now is,
Yeah.
I'll check in with her, be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this.
Yeah.
How you feel? And so I was like,
Love
all right,
that.
well, if you do that, then,
Yeah. Family
I need
business.
family. Yeah, we
I
need some
love
family
that.
time for this. Yeah. So
you mentioned Atlanta. Do you sell like your coffee beans nationwide?
yeah,
Okay.
we do. I'd probably say about 40% of our business actually goes outside of the state.
Wow. Okay.
So 60 of it stays within state. That's with our e-commerce basically. And so we've been really fortunate with that, and kind of I think really just telling our story, and some of the recognition that we've received has helped in that for sure. And then I hope also that just people getting to enjoy the coffee and
Yeah.
enjoying the taste of what it is that we're producing has done that. But initially it was Seattle, it was
Yeah.
King County, and then LA, the Bay Area, with the green coffee,
Yeah.
and then Atlanta, Toronto, Vancouver, and such. And then finally, when we got to opening up our space, then with our e-commerce, that allowed us to expand further. But now, there are certain cafes that carry our coffee inside their spaces, Atlanta and South Carolina, and
Wow. Nice.
and DC and places, and grocery stores and such now too.
Nice.
So
Awesome. Are there other like cafes and or coffee seller. What is coffee? You're not the producer.
No,
But,
no.
Like that part of selling coffee. What would I call that?
Um,
Coffee seller.
like a roaster,
Yeah, like
typically,
is
or
anybody
cat.
else? Are there any other like
Operator.
Eritrean or Ethiopian
Yeah.
operator doing that, or are you?
Oh, there are no,
Okay.
no, no. Definitely following in the footsteps of
Footsteps.
others. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. One of the places that I think about are, especially in the restaurant spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to even cafes, really, it was the restaurants that were selling the coffee or doing the
Okay.
traditional coffee ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to like Little Ethiopia in LA
Oh,
or
wow.
in Ethiopia, I mean in DC,
Yeah.
and seeing the coffee ceremony be presented as an option with inside of the,
Oh.
so you'd get the food, but then it's
And
like at
then
the end of it, do you want
Okay.
tea or you want coffee? We'll do the whole thing.
Nice.
And they'll have incense. And I remember
Yeah.
seeing that too. It was like,
Okay.
oh, like this is
Nice.
great. And so, yeah, I'd say probably I saw it more so in the restaurant spaces, and I still see it in the restaurant spaces, but there are others for sure too. Here we have Cafe Avol, of course,
Right.
Solomon, and then we have in LA area. Oh, in the Bay Area, actually, Cafe Colucci. Daniel, him and his family have been doing great work from a spice perspective, and then also a restaurant. And then they tacked on, or they've also had the coffee side.
Yeah.
And they're right on Telegraph in Oakland. And yeah, so folks like
Yeah.
him, and there have been others as well. But yeah, it just,
Part of a larger.
larger community that's doing it. Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
cool. I
for
had
sure.
no idea there was a little Ethiopia in LA.
Yeah, yeah,
What?
yeah,
How
yeah.
did I
yeah.
miss that? I'm gonna
Matter
have
of fact,
to check that out.
what was the show Insecure?
Oh,
There was definitely scenes
yeah,
inside
I
of
feel like-
Insecure
okay, that's
where they
right.
would go to little
I
Ethiopia
did-
and eat.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I
So,
thought it was just an Ethiopian restaurant. I didn't know.
Yeah.
So is there like other things in the area, or just
so it'd be
restaurant?
like, I think it was just like, for the most part, it was a strip. It was just one
Gotcha.
road,
Okay.
and I believe it was like, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know LA that well,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
like East Hollywood or like
Okay.
in that area
Okay.
vicinity, and so there was tons of restaurants and
Okay.
cafes and such.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I do remember that
Yeah,
from Insecure.
And then also on Telegraph in Oakland too, I'd say that there's quite a few like
Yeah.
restaurants and bars and stuff like that where you can experience like Ethiopian Eritrean,
Yeah.
and then there's a little Ethiopian DC too.
I hear that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know there's a large like community there too, right?
It's actually, I think, the biggest community outside of Ethiopia or
Really?
Eritrea of the diaspora, like in that area, is in DC. Yeah.
Nice. With your cafe, I see, on the menu, I know you kind of try to like innovate, be
Yeah, yeah,
innovative. There
yeah,
was,
yeah.
You're putting berbere in some coffee drinks. Like,
Yeah.
what inspired that? And were you like nervous about it? Did you like have this battle of like wanting to just be authentic and just like traditional and then like innovating?
No, okay. So the first one that came to mind was like Americano. I remember it was like the first day of the cafe, and it was like, you know what? We're using African coffee, and obviously there's a story behind the Americano where that came from. It was like a World War II story. So they had espresso, but the Americans would like it a little bit more with water.
Gotcha.
And so it was espresso
Okay.
and water, and so that's where Americano came
Okay,
from.
cool. Nice.
And so we were like, why don't we call it Africano? And so the Africano stuck, and so, because it's all African beans,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so that stuck. But then also, our team started saying like we could produce some of these syrups inside. We don't
Yeah.
need to buy the kind of the syrups that are on the shelves and such. And so let's produce it in house and get creative with our menu.
Yeah.
And really, it was the team that led it. And then
Nice.
over time, then we're like, how do we incorporate like different things that are traditional? And it was like, how do we get berbere in there?
Yeah.
And I think it was the fact that it was like it was the Mexican mocha, which is a spicier mocha. I remember having that at a particular cafe. I can't remember in the city. And then I was like, what if we were to try berbere in a mocha and see how that plays out? And we tested it out, and it tastes great. I had my
Nice.
mom try it. I was
What
nervous
did
about
mom
her.
say?
She was like, "This is good." She was like, "This is
Love
good."
it.
It's definitely different than
Yeah.
what She was
Right.
like, "I've never used
Yeah.
something sweet," but it worked, and it kind of continued on, and so we've
Okay.
incorporated other things like it's called bezo, but it's like it's a toasted barley ground up really fine, and you steam milk with it. And you can sweeten it up with simple syrup or another, one of the house syrups or whatnot. And so, but traditionally it's actually consumed in the morning. It's like a breakfast. It's like it's a drink in the morning, like nice and hearty.
Yeah.
And so, we would incorporate things like that, things that we saw or I saw kind of growing up, and said, how do we incorporate that? And so it was one to kind of like educate and showcase a little bit more of like, the different spices or beverages that we consume in East Africa. And so, it was
nice.
It was to have fun with it, but also educate. I think that's kind of a side of what we like to do too, and not trying to be really stuck up within the space of coffee, but kind of, we say coffee nerds, and so more of a welcoming, and we have this knowledge, we want to share it, we're eager to share it, and so it's more of a welcoming kind of side of it.
So you do the coffee ceremony at Boon Boona?
We do, yep. And so every Sunday from 9 to 1, but then there's also a period of time, there's classes that I lead, which are much more in depth, which are about an hour and a half, and that goes into the history of coffee, how it was found, and its journey throughout the world, and and then trying coffee itself.
I love it. I love your story. I love what you're doing.
I
think it's so important to pass our stories, our history, our roots. It's so sad to me when it gets lost. So I think the work that you're doing is really, really important.
I'm grateful, and I'm glad I have a mentor and a friend in the space doing what you're doing. I'm honored and grateful to hear your story too.
Yeah. I feel like similarities. I think that all us third culture kids, have really kind of like similar stories, upbringing, and kind of, especially us who, try to do the entrepreneur stuff, relating back to our roots. It's, that same kind of like struggle, but also like pride as well. I know that when I took over my family's restaurant, and then I launched a pop-up recently last year as well, just kind of always, I don't know, deep inside me have always had this like calling to share my culture. When we first started, you were saying how when you came here, one of the questions, like, you're from where? And like people had no idea where. That question to me, when I would tell people I'm from Brazil, like I was also like 6 years old. So it was like first graders and second graders that were saying this to me, but like they had no idea. And I just remember like the feeling still, just feeling like so invalidated as like a person, you know what I mean? Like, how don't you know where I'm from? And that's like such a part of me. I think it's like stuck with me that like for the rest of my life, I'm like, I have to tell people what Brazil is and what it's all about. And for me, it's through food, through culinary. Because I think that, a lot of our history, a lot of our roots and heritage, like, you can learn through food, and that's the best way to learn, I think. It is through food and beverage, and just our like traditional ceremonies and stuff like that.
You're right, 100%. It is such a great window to history and culture, and it's so beautiful. I mean, honestly, to an extent that I always wanted to have a foot here and a foot back on the continent, and just kind of go bounce and forth. And I love the way you refer to it as a third culture, because truly it is. And you're pulling back, and you're like, yo, how do I share this? Because this is so cool. I want people to know. And I agree. Through food and beverage, it's a great way to do it. It's a great medium for it.
And I'm thankful that we are of this time right now, because I think that people are like more curious as well.
I agree.
And open to learning and paying respect and homage and things like that. So I feel really lucky to be a part of this time.
You're right about that. I mean, I feel like as sometimes when I do tell that story, just like even our name Boon Boona, it's like, what does Boon or Boona mean? It's like, oh, it's just coffee. It's how we say coffee in East Africa. So Boon is more common in Eritrea. The word Boon, Bunni or Boon is used in Arabic as for the bean itself. Boona is more common in Ethiopia, and then coffee. And coffee itself, the word comes from that region in Ethiopia called Kaffa. So even in that is like, is providing an understanding of the roots of coffee, is where it comes from. And sometimes, it seems like the narrative, or, where is it coming from? You think, oh, it's a product of Italy.
Right.
Not necessarily, and so hearing that story is so important, because then it provides a little bit more depth for anyone that truly enjoys the beverage. They're going to want to go deeper.
Right.
And it's great. It provides, I think, a further understanding and an appreciation for the thing that you're consuming.
Exactly.
And how much cooler is that?
Totally agree. Where do you see Boon Boona heading to next?
Oh shoot, I swear I don't even know.
No, you don't have like
So,
any crazy big dreams. That's like,
you know, this is my hope is this, right? My hope is that the things that we set out to do back in 2011, 2012, when I was just kind of working on the game plan as to what this would become, is that we continue to deliver better at those things, which is, intentionality in sourcing, doing more to impact where we're sourcing from, considering our supply chain from beginning to end, our engagement in our community. So what are we doing inside of our cafes, outside of our cafes, and then, producing delicious coffee, and if we could do that well, then I'm happy, and what that means, I don't know, but I hope that we're able to just deliver on those things. And if it opens another door for us to go into something else, into another, location or into another grocery store, great. But it needs to be founded. It needs to be built off of that. And that's most important. So, a common thing that I speak to is, nailing it and then scaling it. And so the thing that we're doing, we want to do it better. What was the last year this time we did an exercise around, what was the game plan when this was first drawn out, and are we applying those things? Are we doing those things? And that was just internal for us. And it was great to reflect on those things and be like, okay, hey, we're doing some of these things really well, and other things we can improve on. And we definitely have more desires to do those things. And so we're just trying to figure it out as a small business, trying to navigate, really it's a very challenging space, and trying to keep up with things. But I'm grateful to do it. I'm grateful to be able to take this journey and to, satisfy my crazy heart's desire of, going wild within the coffee space.
I love it.
So, and I had to have a team that helps me on that journey.
Yeah, nice. And then just speaking about you as a businessman, outside of, like the coffee ceremony in Eritrea and stuff, just plain old business entrepreneur, you had your foot in corporate America. I kind of like also dipped my toes a little bit as well. Not my thing, not my cup of coffee.
Let's go.
But you've done that, you've done this, both very hard. Being an entrepreneur, especially like brick and mortar, like food and beverage industry, is not for the faint of heart. But like, what can you say to somebody who is in the corporate world, like struggling right now? Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, usually in what I say to folks in the corporate space, and maybe have a desire to start up their own cupcake business, or their own line of clothing, whatever that dream is. And one, I always say that your heart's got to be in it. That's the first and foremost. So your heart needs to be completely invested in it, so that you can weather the ups and downs. And then there's kind of this like emotional kind of like really kind of like trying to balance, the wins and the losses, and trying to navigate through that, because not getting too excited when something great happens, and not beating yourself up too much when it doesn't go your way, and just trying to kind of stay even keeled as much as possible. So I always say, your heart, and then kind of this emotional kind of like being ready to accept this journey. And I think that happens more if your heart is in it. The other part is that I think there's this, I need to quit, or I need to leave my corporate job in order to fulfill my dreams. Maybe that's the case in what it is that person is aspiring to go into. But I believe that there's also an opportunity for being, both the practical side and, realistic about things, and then also the dreamer. And for me, it took a long time, because it was like, I had this crazy idea in 2011, and then 2012 I started, incorporating and doing things, but I had to get back to work. I had to pay my bills,
They don't stop coming.
They don't stop coming. And so, for 7 years, it was like, all right, I'm gonna keep working my full-time job. And at the same time, on the weekends, I'll, package up coffee. I'll put it in the trunk of my car, and I'll go hit up all the stores that I need to drop off coffee, and do what I need to do to establish relationships and such. and that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And slowly just grow it.
Yeah.
Now, did I do a good job at that? No. I was not kind enough to myself. I was really tough on myself as like, hey, why aren't you at your goal yet?
Right.
Why haven't you opened up yet? And all that stuff. But truth of the matter is that being practical, working my corporate job, even though I wasn't happy, it's like I wish I did, recognize that I am working on my dream.
Right.
I am building that dream, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But as I continue to walk forward, appreciating and acknowledging myself on that way, but the two can work together to get you to your desired, outcome. And so, that's what I typically speak to is that, don't be too hard on yourself. And if you're taking the time to work on your business even a little bit, that's great. You're building your dream. You're getting to your dream, and eventually it'll come true.
Yeah. And then when it does come true, it's like everybody's like, "Oh my God, you did it overnight!"
Yeah. That's the crazy part. Yeah,
and they don't see all that. You work and you going to classes and putting it in the back of your car. So
no, really... definitely there is that. And I mean. Especially for, person of color, black man, it's like, oh, like, whose is this? Yeah. Whose business is this? It's like, you could have done this. Yeah. And before I had all the gray hair, like, I mean, it was definitely like, who's this young kid doing this? Like, but the reality, it's definitely, the journey. It is a journey, and one that I am grateful for, because and this is another thing too, in that corporate space, I did learn a lot, because I was in finance. I learned how to manage my books for the most part, and so
super important.
Super important. And so not that I still don't have my struggles with it, and it's running a business is definitely a lot of exercise, but the fundamentals of accounting and finance, I understand that. And then even to the point where about kind of staying on top of those things, all of that stuff I gained there. And then even in some of the cultures and companies that I had worked for, some of them were a little bit more aggressive. Some of them had a very welcoming culture. Each one had their own unique things. And in that, I'm learning, what kind of culture do I want to create for my business? Do I want to have this, like, get it done now? What, what the F are you doing? Get at it, and somebody yelling at you all the time? Or do you want to be more of a supportive, playing a role of like, how do I help you get to that point? This is for the benefit of all of us and what we're going to do. And so,
nice.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like we need a part 2 to this conversation, because there's just so more, that we can dive into, like how you were speaking, young black man, imposter syndrome. I'm sure it's something that
without a doubt
you have felt.
Even being here with you.
Totally.
It's an honor.
Does it ever stop? I don't know. It's just, again, that doubting yourself. We always, it's just how high the volume is on that little voice. Efrem, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so honored. You are my first guest.
Let me tell you, I'm so grateful for that. I am.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much to be first on your program too, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Thank you.
It will do extremely well, and I'm so happy that I'm here with you. And to meet your community.
Yes. Tell me how people can connect with you and support your work.
Well, Boon Boona Coffee. So our cafes primarily in the Seattle area. And Renton is our home base. I always have to give a shout out to Renton. And then at Boon Boona Coffee, and Boon Boona Coffee is BOONA COFFEE. So Boon Boona Coffee.
Nice. On Instagram, Boon
on
Boona
Instagram,
Coffee.
on Facebook.
Awesome. All right. Thank you everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe and share with friends and family, and stay tuned for the next episode of Dishin Up Diaspora, where we'll continue to uncover the stories that connects us all through food.